Hello and a very warm welcome to World Panorama, the show that gives you a 360-degree view of major global events of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Before we move ahead, here's a look at the top stories this week. Government crackdown continues in Syria, even as UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon asks head of UN Relief Agency to visit Syria to assess the humanitarian situation. Diplomatic wrangling rages on between New Delhi and Rome. The Kerala High Court extends Italian Marines' custody by another week. Violence rears its ugly head in Iraq. Scores killed and dozens injured in a wave of bombings targeting security forces. And in sports, Argentine striker Carlos Tevez apologizes to Manchester City management. Manager Mancini says Tevez can play a starring role. Those were the top stories this week. Our focus today are the fast-moving developments in Syria. As Syria is cracking down harder on the so-called armed groups, the international community is ratcheting up economic and diplomatic pressure on the country. Experts say the situation in Syria appears to be deteriorating and that an end to the crisis remains nowhere in sight. As the 11th-month-long unrest worsens, Syria appears to have entered a crucial phase. What's in store in the months ahead? Is Syria headed for a stalemate? We'll discuss this with a special guest I have with me in the studio, Dr. Waiel Awwad, South Asia Bureau Chief of Al Arabia. Thanks so much, sir, for joining me today here. Before we move ahead, here's a look at a detailed report.
Warnings from Syrian activists of a humanitarian catastrophe in Homs grew more desperate on Thursday as government forces resumed shelling of an opposition stronghold where hundreds have died in a week-long.
I think the sickening thing is the complete merciless nature. They are hitting civilian buildings absolutely mercilessly and without caring, and the scale of it is just shocking.
Among those who were killed in the violence in Homs were veteran American war correspondent Marie Colvin, who had been working for the Sunday Times of London, and a young French photographer, Remy Ochlik. Their killing has sparked strong reactions.
The situation in Syria remains dramatic. I am deeply shocked by the news that 2 foreign journalists have been killed in Homs. I severely condemn the actions of the Syrian security forces.
Today, the only witnesses on the ground are foreign journalists. And the population is desperate to get the media to cover the reality on the ground. So there's no reason to shoot at journalists. It is therefore most probably people related to the regime who are trying to deter journalists from working in Homs.
The UN General Assembly demanded an immediate halt to Syria's brutal crackdown. Russia has asked the United Nations to request the Secretary General to send a representative to liaise with all sides in Syria on the safe passage of humanitarian convoys.
Actually, our initiative is aimed at providing safety to humanitarian cargo deliveries. We are actively working with Syria and countries around it so that the people don't suffer from the ongoing violence.
Meanwhile, the US says it may have to consider additional measures in Syria if a political solution does not work.
Our focus now is on trying to pressure the regime into a political solution and on aiding the people of Syria, both in presenting a viable political alternative and in a humanitarian way. And I've also said repeatedly, and I say it again today, that we don't think contributing to the further militarization of Syria is a good idea.
China, Russia and Iran oppose the resolution put forward by Arab states with Western support just days after Beijing and Moscow vetoed a similar resolution in the UN Security Council. The European Union believes that the members of the UN Security Council should shoulder responsibility for ending rising violence in Syria, calling for Assad to step aside.
I just think what's happening in Syria is appalling, and I've been very clear on behalf of all 27 member states of the European Union that leadership does not involve the murder of your own people or anyone else. It involves working with your people and finding solutions. And we've been very clear, therefore, that President Assad should stand aside.
Given the dramatic humanitarian situation in Syria, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has decided to dispatch Emergency Relief Coordinator Valerie Amos to the war-torn Arab country to assess the ground situation.
All right, let me get in Dr. Awwad at this point in time. Dr. Awwad, my first question to you is, there's so much happening around Syria. The situation is worsening by the day. Tell us what really is the ground situation. You keep reading all these reports every day, but that perhaps is just one side of the story.
Exactly, you've said it, and my sympathy goes to the family of the loss of my colleagues in Syria, and I deeply sympathize with them as much as I sympathize with my own peoples of brothers and sisters who are losing their life daily on Syria. It's a very painful morning to get up and see all the death in the street of Syria, which indicates that the Syrian situation is not an indigenous unrest as it has started. It has been hijacked by rebels, by external forces, by mercenaries who are in the ground that they have been inside. Now, coming back to the West and one side the report, yes, we know that all these journalists were in Homs and they were entered the country illegally, where the government had nothing to do with it. But nevertheless, if they wanted to bring the real picture of what's happening in Syria, if that is the case, then we should also give the other side of the story of the government, where it says that there are more than 5,000 security personnel and army officers have lost their life, including the double number in the civilian side. If that is the case, that means it's an open war, and it is the legitimacy of any government in the world to take its own control to restore law and order. It is the popular demand that the government is facing now in Syria, calling on the government to restore law and order. It's become a kind of an anarchy in many parts of Syria. So those pockets where the rebellion have taken the dominant part, the Syrian government, the whole world understood that these people have already taken the stage. But when the government take on them, it's a humanitarian issue. Why then aren't you trying to seize the violence from both the sides and let the people sit down across the table and discuss for a dialogue?
Right. Let me just pick up from where you left. Now, the whole world is in fact trying to take note of the situation and trying to come to a resolution. The UN has been keeping up their own efforts, while you know what's been happening with Russia and China. Where do you think the entire situation is headed? We're also learning of this new resolution that is being worked upon, taking Russia into confidence. What now?
The problem with the UN is being hijacked by the West and the United States. It's nothing to do with a real resolution to solve the Syrian crisis. If you wanted to solve the crisis, you have to indulge the government in solving the crisis. You cannot jump to any conclusion and come with any resolution without taking the government in confidence. The government still have the support of the majority of the people. We have a president who have the most popular president till date. Two of the major cities in Syria, Aleppo and Damascus, is still supporting him strongly, which means 55% of the population, irrespective of the other sectors of Syria and other cities and provinces, still supporting him. And the army is behind him. If you have the majority behind the government, why are you siding with the minorities?
Right.
Nevertheless, the minorities have the right, the government have the right, but we need to sit down across the table. If you wanted to come up with a resolution, you must come with the government involved in it. If you just come and step and regime change, it's nothing. The UN has been the tools used by its superpower to gain what they want on the ground. Who cares about democracy or human rights in the world? This is really the issues they are? And let us not fool ourselves. We know what the American interest in the region. We know what is the disintegration of the Arab world. We have seen what happened in Iraq. We have seen what happened in Libya. We are seeing what's happening in the Arab Spring and across the North African states of Arab country. It's all happening. It's nothing to do. It's an anarchy in the region.
So one thing is clear, Dr. Awwad, that the president of Syria is not going anywhere. He has massive support behind him. But then again, what now? What's going to happen in Syria? A lot of developments are taking place. What do you see in the coming few months? Will the
I think the
situation
Russians
change?
have preempted what happened in our the council, what's so-called the Friend of Syria meeting in Tunisia. It already preempted the stage, because if you notice what is the real discussion on that ground was based only on changing of regime, calling on a humanitarian corridors and calling for foreign intervention. That was the case. So Russia have issued a statement within the United Nations Security Council and with Mr. Ban Ki-moon to send a representative to Syria to show that the reality on the ground. What we need at this stage is a ceasefire. A ceasefire is a must. There should be no firing from both the sides. American and the West should understand that don't maintain the rebels, arming the rebels. Because if you remember, Syrian government has come up with 5 amnesty law calling upon the rebels, lay down your arm and come for a general amnesty. United States have taken the lead 4 months back. Their spokespersons and their permanent representative have already said it on television and told the people of the rebel, do not lay down your arm, do not believe the government. That means you are accepting that the bloodshed in Syria continue to bleed because of the foreign interest. It's not because the people of Syria really want the bloodshed. We do not want the experience of Iraq or Libya to be repeated in Syria.
Absolutely. Dr. Awwad, it's been a pleasure having you on this show. So one thing is clear. Syria holds a very, very crucial position in the Middle East, and the US, Britain and France must tread very, very cautiously on what they do next. Dr. Awwad, thanks so much once again for joining me here on this discussion.